Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.
The National Weather Service.
Good Thursday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It is the 23rd of January. As always, we encourage you to visit our websites for the very latest weather information where you are. You can do that by going to weather.gov and clicking on Alaska, or by heading to our regional page at arh.noaa.gov. Give us a call on the weather info line and save the numbers that you use so you can do it a little bit faster next time. You don't have to listen to all the prompts every single time. 1-800-472-0391. You can find each Weather Service office on Twitter, and we would love to communicate with you on Twitter and watch and see what you post about your weather in your part of Alaska by using the hashtag, that's the # AKWX, short for Alaska Weather. You can find us on Facebook under U.S. National Weather Service Alaska, and many of you already have. Thank you very much. And on YouTube in the afternoon, you can find a short version of our weather forecast here that'll just show you the surface charts going through the next 2 days or so. And you can find that on our YouTube channel if you search for NWS Anchorage. But from alaskapublic.org, after this show into the evening hours, you'll get the entire broadcast on their YouTube channel. You can also go to YouTube and just search for AKWX TV for short. Here's a look at the situation across the Gulf of Alaska at this hour. We're still looking at flood advisories across, or a flood warning, I should say, across the northern parts of the Gulf there, including Yakutat. We have seen substantial amounts of rain there just in the last 24 hours. More than 5¼ inches of rain just in Yakutat alone, not to mention surrounding areas, probably seeing even more, especially at some of the higher terrain there. So a tremendous amount of rain just in 24 hours, and it looks like there's plenty more where that came from as we head into Friday and perhaps even into Saturday in some parts. The rain is letting up in parts of southeast, but places like Sitka, Juneau, and areas up and down the coast have seen well over 1¼ inches of precipitation there. Prince William Sound has seen the fire hose aimed at the eastern Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound just in the last couple hours there. And also Anchorage overnight picked up more than 1/2 inch of precipitation. That on top of snow and ice, of course, is creating ice rinks, many side roads and parking lots, so not a great travel situation there. But that same amount of rain moved over the Alaska Range and into the Fairbanks region earlier today. That closed the international airport for a time, making for very slick runways there. Conditions have improved as the rain moved out. But we've got winter weather advisories all across from the Norton Sound region into the Seward Peninsula, the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, the Noatak, Kobuk Valleys into the upper Kuskokwim Valley. Wind advisories for the Alaska Range with gusts that could reach upwards of 45 to perhaps 60 miles per hour in some of the passes there. Most of what you're looking at is blowing and drifting snow issues and perhaps some freezing rain mixing in with light amounts of snow. We also have some heavier areas of snow and blowing snow across the Chukchi Seacoast, so you see the warning there from Wainwright down to Point Hope. Now we're also looking at a blizzard warning across the Pribilofs. That will continue tonight and into tomorrow. For the Alaska Peninsula and into the chain, things are a little bit quieter, at least as far as the warnings, watches, and advisories go, but there's plenty of weather to talk about. The heavy rain will continue at least through Friday, through Prince William Sound, all the way out toward Yakutat. You can see some of the heavier rain focus, though, will shift, at least for this 24 to 48-hour period. It looks like parts of Prince William Sound and the eastern Kenai Peninsula could see as much as 5 to 7 inches just in that time frame there through early Saturday morning. In many areas, we'll still be looking at occasional rainfall, some of that light on the western side of the Kenai Peninsula and up the Cook Inlet into Anchorage, but again, the fire hose seems to be focused right now as we head into the weekend around Prince William Sound. As you'll notice on the satellite imagery here out to the west, we've got a pretty decent connection with the subtropics. Look at this trail of moisture that goes all the way down to the subtropics, and this bends all the way around. And I wish the image was just a hair bigger here, because you'd see this snake all the way back up into the Gulf of Alaska. This is a substantial connection to the tropics here. And this is really no major hurricane or a cyclone out in this part of the world. We call those cyclones, of course. All this is just streaming away from the subtropical thunderstorm activity or shower activity there, but really no major development moving from east to west. You can also note some other circulations here across the Bering, east of the Kamchatka Peninsula, another one a little bit farther south and west of Shemya. So each one of these little disturbances reinforces that flow at the surface and drives another round of rainfall into the Gulf and into parts of southeast. Some of that, as we saw today, certainly makes its way into the interior as well, and none of that very good. So as you look at all of Alaska here, notice that southeast is seeing that fire hose kind of shift a little bit more to the west. And when I'm talking about the fire hose, I'm talking about this section right about in here. You'll notice the upper level circulation and the surface storm now has moved back very close to the Pribilof Islands and north. That's driving in a much colder flow coming off of eastern Siberia and into the Pribilofs there, blowing, drifting snow, and poor visibility creates that blizzard conditions, of course. And the northerly winds making their way into the eastern parts of the chain. Look like snow was falling there around Dutch Harbor and Unalaska today. But that southerly flow punching up over the Alaska Range brought warm conditions into parts of the interior, and as many of you around Fairbanks, Chena Hot Springs, and points north have experienced today, temperatures were unseasonably warm. That warmth also made its way to the north there across the Arctic coast, but probably stopping very near the Brooks Range there. That boundary will try and nudge forward just a little bit more up toward the North Pole. However, a stronger north and easterly flow as you'll see in the 3,000 and 9,000 foot charts, probably hold that at bay. So it doesn't look like we're going to see those readings back in the 40s across the North Slope anytime soon. But for places like Anchorage today, this was one of the warmest temperatures, warmest days since, I believe, October 29th, when it was 50 degrees. Today's high of 48 tied that record, so impressive for sure. Maybe not overall record setting for the season, but certainly an impressive round of warm and wet air, and it is not done by any stretch of the imagination. Looking out to the west now, low pressure out across the central eastern parts of the Bering and a little bit west of Bristol Bay at 975 millibars. That northerly flow, again, creating blizzard conditions, or what's potentially blizzard conditions as we head through the rest of the night for the Pribilofs. High pressure is breaking up the clouds a little bit across the central and western Aleutians, another wave of low pressure back to the west. Rainfall and a little bit of snow around the eastern chain today. South and western Alaska seeing pockets of rain, freezing rain. Areas of fog there around Galena. You'll see snow across the Arctic coast and around the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, around the Bering Strait too. Low pressure across the Brooks Range. This wave moving northward today brought that round of rain through Fairbanks. That has now moved its way northward. It was mostly cloudy by late afternoon. Pockets of rain there around Prince William Sound and the eastern Kenai Peninsula with a south and easterly flow that will continue and probably give some more wind for areas in south central and the Alaska Range tonight. High pressure sitting across the western parts of British Columbia, also yielding pockets of rain for south and east, but the focus is right here along this stationary boundary, and as that is sitting right there and probably pointing right at Yakutat, that should keep a region of heavy rain right there across the north and eastern parts of the coast. Tonight's forecast shows that wave of heavy rain is still moving around the northern coast, around Prince William Sound, pockets of southeast. And again, as the wind moves in, probably won't see a whole lot of rain in south central Alaska initially, but that may change as we go into the nighttime hours. Low pressure there south and west of Nunivak Island brings an opportunity for rain and snow for the southern parts of the Alaska Peninsula, Cold Bay, north and west of Sandpoint. And then once you get into Norton Sound and the upper Kuskokwim and even the lower and mid-Yukon valleys, you might see a better opportunity for some light freezing rain there. So that's why we've got some of the winter weather advisories posted for you. It simply means use a little more caution than normal as conditions may be changing, and in this case they could be a little slick. Across the Arctic coast and the Brooks Range, pockets of snow there, some of that a little bit steadier than others, especially across the Chukchi Seacoast. Watch for blowing snow there, as well as winds will be coming up to around 30 knots or so. Low pressure is sitting just west of Nunivak Island and north and east of the Pribilofs is bringing a much drier northerly flow to the central Aleutians. Still a few snow showers there, and that other wave of low pressure we saw will generate some light snow out across the eastern parts of the Kamchatka Peninsula. Looking at Friday, high pressure really hasn't moved much across southeast, but it is sitting at 1,028 millibars. That's enough to break up some of the clouds and some of that wetter weather for central and southern parts of southeast. It may not be entirely dry. Is it ever really in southeast? Well, it looks like things will be drying up anyway toward Friday into Saturday, and you'll have a better chance of seeing maybe a little bit of sunshine, but certainly a better opportunity of fog over precipitation. So things should be drying up for you. But that fire hose and that connection to the subtropical moisture is still there. So with that, areas of rain and maybe even heavy rain from Prince William Sound to Yakutat and perhaps down the eastern part of the Kenai Peninsula will still be there. It may come and go in waves, but this is only Friday and we've yet to get through the weekend. Pockets of freezing rain possible around Fairbanks. Northward, that becomes snow, especially north of the Yukon Valley. A frontal boundary sitting across the Brooks Range becomes a warm front, warm air still trying to lift northward across the Bering Strait. On the west side of that, we've got a driving northerly flow, and again, that could create some strong winds and blowing and drifting snow and poor visibility there. Areas of rain and snow showers across the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern parts of the chain, with rain and snow showers there across the YK Delta and south and western Alaska. Going into Saturday, that rain is still there. The warm front has moved just a little bit more to the west. That brings back the opportunity for freezing rain, though pretty light across southwest Alaska, and rain and snow showers there. Showers of rain mainly around Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and most of the Alaska Peninsula. Snow's back for the eastern parts of the chain there, including Dutch Harbor on Alaska and Nikolsky, and snow showers still possible across the western parts of the chain. And the Chukchi Seacoast, looking at more of an offshore flow, but you could see some areas of blowing and drifting snow and snowfall there. Meanwhile, southeast, you get fog. You'll get a little bit drier weather, but it does still look like you'll be socked in with a very good chance of fog as we head into Saturday afternoon. Here's a look at temperatures now. As you know, in southeast, it was pretty warm today. 40s and 50s, 53 around Sitka, 48 around Juneau, 51 around Haines and Skagway, upper 40s there for southern parts of southeast around Metlakatla and Ketchikan. Prince William Sound is looking at temperatures in the mid to upper 40s today. Look at Seward, 51 degrees, 35 in Kenai. A light northerly wind, and you did not warm up very much today. On the other hand, like I said, we approached a record-setting heat there at 48 in Anchorage at the Weather Forecast Office. That would be a tie for the record high. 34 in Talkeetna, 42 in Glen Allen, 20s and 30s for a large part of the Fairbanks region today. A little bit farther south toward Healy, it was 47. Greeley was 47 as well. And Eagle showing 53 degrees late this afternoon. As you look northward into the Yukon Valley, in the upper Yukon, upper 20s, lower 30s there into McGrath, it was 35 degrees. Fort Yukon, absent from our map today, but Arctic Village, hardly Arctic at 21 degrees. Anaktuvuk Pass about the same. The Arctic coast, anywhere from 0 to 5 below. Just not very, very cold stuff at all. Around Kotzebue Sound, 20s and 30s there. Shishmaref, 25. Nome, 32. As you get out toward Grayling, it was hovering close to freezing. Bethel was showing 40 degrees. St. Lawrence Island, 19. And around the Alaska Peninsula, 40s and 50s today. King Salmon was 50 degrees, 46 in Kodiak, 30s and 40s for the eastern parts of the Aleutians, and lower 40s around Sandpoint. The Pribilovs in the upper 20s today, again, with potentially blizzard conditions there, and 20s and 30s for Adak and Atka. Overnight low temperatures obviously very mild across the southern third of the state. 40s for south and east, even some areas near 50 around Klawock. Single-digit temps in the interior, north of the Yukon primarily. The Arctic coast 5 to 15 below, and high temperatures there. Closing in on 0 tomorrow, with many areas south of the Yukon above the freezing point again for your Friday. 30s and 40s for the south and west coast. 40s, even 50s for southeast. South central looking at highs in the lower 40s again. Flying weather now. IFR conditions expected across the northern parts of the Gulf Coast primarily. This points out where the heavy rain potential is tomorrow. Along the Alaska Range, you can expect some strong winds perhaps, and IFR conditions there. Same goes for the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, and here's our northerly flow, decreasing visibility with the cold air driving southward. Across pass conditions now, Anaktuvuk expected to turn over to IFR conditions. Same goes for Adigan Pass as we go through Friday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will at least start at IFR and may see some improvement during the day. Rainy Pass probably will not. IFR conditions there. And for Windy Pass, Isabel Pass expected to remain instrument flight rule. Mentasta Pass, we should remain at IFR. Tanita Pass, MVFR conditions expected there. Portage Pass, likely IFR. And for Chilkoot and White Pass, some lifting of that visibility early in the morning, and then probably going back toward MVFR during the afternoon. Watch for at least a mostly cloudy sky there. We'll see how low the deck goes. Freezing levels, though warm and wet air is punching up across the eastern Gulf there. You can see it's making its intrusion all the way to the Brooks Range now. Really impressive stuff, especially for January. 2,000 to 4,000 foot freezing lines there all the way up over the Seward Peninsula and the YK Delta. Here's our surface freezing line snaking up over Norton Sound and north of the Alaska Range and into the Yukon. This is a substantially warm and wet flow. Icing potential below 14,000 feet and as high as 8,000 feet from Yakutat to maybe points west there into Prince William Sound. A lot of that snaking its way across the Arctic coast now may present you with light to isolated moderate reports. And for the pilots out there who submitted reports today, I don't think I've seen any day that has had more pilot reports from folks like you than today. So thank you for issuing your pilot reports. We use them and we appreciate them as well as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit does. So thank you very much. Out across the west, the Bering Strait, down across St. Matthew Island waters in the eastern parts of the chain, anywhere from above 2,000 feet out across the Bering Strait to below 5,000 feet once you get around the Pribilofs and into the eastern Aleutians tomorrow. The jet stream shows that huge trough sitting across the Bering Sea in the North Pacific. This, combined with the moisture we saw a minute ago on the satellite picture, is zipping all the way across the Gulf and into south central Alaska. Meanwhile, north and westerly winds take that cold that would normally be ours and take it into the midsections in the eastern parts of the country. Places in Nashville today, in St. Louis, and even Little Rock were colder than many parts of Alaska. Just amazing stuff, something you wouldn't normally expect. Around 9,000 feet, that southerly flow working across south central brings winds in around 50 to 60 knots. Our circulation out around the St. Matthew Island waters shows winds between 40 and 50 knots here, so that's driving that colder air down toward the Aleutians. Meanwhile, the southerly flow is working up the west coast of Alaska, and high pressure still snaking its way over southeast, trying to stabilize the weather there. At 3,000 feet, you'll notice that south and easterly wind still working in across the eastern Gulf. Wind speeds there around 20 or 40 knots or so. And more of a southwesterly flow coming up the YK Delta and reaching places like Nome at 40 knots. A northerly flow still working its way toward the central Aleutians, slowing down a little bit from 50 knots coming off of areas around the Gulf of Anadyr to about 20 knots by the time it gets to the central Aleutians, with a little bit of an inverted trough here across the North Pacific. Turbulence potential. Most of the state will see the opportunity for light to isolated moderate chop. Below 6,000 feet for the eastern and upper parts of the Yukon. Your worst trouble will probably be around the YK Delta north of Cape Newenham to about a Monarch or so and into the Norton Sound below 6,000 feet there. Occasional widespread moderate, maybe some isolated severe possible, and along that frontal boundary there across the central Gulf. And watch for some occasional moderate, mainly around the Chukchi Sea coast north of Kotzebue Sound and perhaps around the eastern chain below 4,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. A lot to talk about there, but we're not done. We'll talk about your marine forecast here in just a few minutes.
A new perspective on Orion.
Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Plot Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. Fellow stargazer Marlene Hidalgo will join us to help you find your way around the sky. Now that we're in the dead of winter, it's time for one constellation to really shine.
That's right. Orion is the unmistakable king of the stars this season. You can find him by his distinctive 3 stars in a row that mark his belt and several other stars that mark his body and head.
From Earth, the outline of Orion is easy to imagine. But what if you could take a trip off the Earth and sail among the stars? Would Orion still look the same from another solar system?
Let's show you. The stars are all different distances from us in space. The closest star is Alpha Centauri, and we should really call it a system instead of a star. Alpha Centauri is actually 3 stars that orbit each other, 2 yellow suns and 1 little red one.
The system is about 4.3 light years away. In miles, that's about 25 trillion miles. So even though Alpha Centauri is closer than the other stars, it's not exactly close.
The farthest star you can see with the naked eye is Deneb. It marks the tail of the swan constellation Cygnus.
It's a whopping 3,000 light years away. So the distance of the stars you see at night can vary a lot.
Okay, we have our sky set to any night this week facing southeast. And behold, there he is, Orion in all his glory.
No stars tie together like those in the constellation of Orion. Let's outline the 3 stars in a row he wears for a belt. Their names are, from left to right, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka.
From there, we can outline the rest of his body to show him as a mighty hunter with his upraised right arm holding a club and his outstretched left arm holding a lion skin. And he has other stars that form a sword hanging from his belt.
Okay, I know it takes a lot of imagination, but see if you can see him in the stars.
Now let's label Orion's other major stars. We have bright blue Rigel marking his foot and the really red star named Betelgeuse marking his armpit.
His other shoulder is a star called Bellatrix, and the other knee is called Safe. Finally, his head star, which is kinda dim, is called Maesa.
So you're calling Orion dumb?
No, just dim. Anyway, from Earth, these 8 stars form a nice, neat pattern that our imaginations can turn into a giant hunter. They look like they're the same distance from us, but...
The closest of the 8 stars is Bellatrix at about 244 light years away. That means the light we see shining from this star left it 244 years ago.
Next is Big Bad Betelgeuse, who is about 624 light years away. So Orion's armpit is nowhere near his other shoulder.
Safe is a little farther at around 650 light years, and Rigel measures about 772 light years away.
So Orion's head and belt are his farthest stars. Belt star Alnitak is about 800 light years away, and Mintaka lies 916 light years away.
Head star Maesa is 1,042 light years away, and
Alnilam is a whopping 1,342 light years away. That means that because we can see Alnilam as a bright star at such a vast distance, it must be humongous.
That's right. The diameter of Alnilam is nearly 30 times that of our sun. So, what if we launch off the Earth and travel faster than the speed of light to gain a different perspective on the stars of Orion?
when we come around to the side of these 8 stars, we can see Bellatrix far away from the rest and Alnilam way over on the other side. Can you see Orion and the stars now?
Definitely not from this perspective.
So let's head back home since I prefer our earthly view.
So look for Orion this week and think about the vast distances to the stars.
And the vast emptiness between the stars.
Stargazing can definitely take your mind on some incredible journeys as you
Keep looking up.
Time for your marine forecast now. Across southeast and the coastal waters, we're looking at a broad southeasterly flow around 20 to 30 knots coming up the coastline there. You'll notice some changes though in the inner channels, more of a north and easterly flow around Stevens Passage and the central sections of the inner channels, more of a southeasterly flow across the southern areas at 10 knots with the 2-foot sea, and stronger southerly winds across the Lynn Canal, 25 knots with a 5-foot sea. Watch though as that becomes light northerly on Saturday with light easterlies there coming out of Stevens Passage, and we'll keep our southeasterly flow in the south, but more of an offshore flow between Yakutat and Gustavus, and with that we start to stabilize the atmosphere here, and we'll have a better chance for some fog and less precipitation going into the first part of the weekend. For South Central, a broad southeasterly flow still remains strong around Prince William Sound, 30 to 40 knots going into Prince William Sound, 6-foot seas on the inside, 21-foot seas on the outside. Looks like 20-knot winds there coming into the southern tip of the Cook Inlet and into the eastern parts of the Kenai Peninsula, 17-foot seas there. 15 to 20-knot winds coming in from the south and southeast around the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, and up to Cook Inlet. That will switch around late in the day on Friday, and once we get into Saturday, we're back into a northerly wind, 20 to 30 knots, coming all the way down into Shelikof Strait from the north and east with an 11-foot sea there, 5-foot seas on the north end of Cook Inlet in ice-free waters, and easterly winds coming into Cook Inlet, 35 knots, 30 knots, reaching eastern parts of Kodiak Island with 14-foot seas. Northeasterlies inside Prince William Sound. The seas are down to 2 feet there, but winds are still up at 15 knots, and easterlies outside of Prince William Sound with seas at 13 feet. Around the Alaska Peninsula, south and westerly winds are working their way over the peninsula with southeasterlies inside Bristol Bay with a 25-knot wind and 7-foot seas. Probably going to be some higher gusts in this region. As we get into Saturday, expect the winds to shift to more of an east and northeasterly direction. A 40-knot wind here south of Sand Point, easterlies south of Kodiak Island with a 14-foot sea, and those northeasterly winds will drive seas to 7, maybe 11 feet as you get down toward Cold Bay. Across the Aleutians, variable flow is still possible there around the central Aleutians and out west around Kiska. But after you move east of Adak, winds are coming in from the west and northwest between about 20 and 25 knots. On the Bering Sea side, 9 to 12 foot seas are expected, 9 to 11 foot seas on the Pacific side, and southwesterlies have already made it back to the western parts of the chain at 20 knots. Those become more westerly as we head into Saturday. Winds remain relatively light there around Adak out to Kiska. Freezing spray is still a threat across the southern Bering with winds between 20 and 35 knots, the strongest of which will be in the eastern parts of the chain. Remembering our low is just north of the Pribilofs. That's going to put the strongest pressure gradient here from about Nikolsky and eastward up the Alaska Peninsula. So you'll stay in that cold, stronger northerly flow. And south of the chain, those waves could make it up to about 15 feet. As we look at the west coast, notice a south and easterly flow on Friday. Again, our low pressure system right about in here. Notice that easterly flow coming off the YK Delta, 25-knot winds there. Over the ice, 11-foot seas around St. Matthew, southwesterlies around the Pribilofs with a 35-knot wind coming into the northern parts of Kuskokwim Bay. As we get into Saturday, the winds switch course there a little bit, more of a northeasterly flow. We get into southerly winds blowing all the way up toward the Bering Strait and northwesterly winds on the backside of that system across the Pribilofs with a 9-foot sea. Stronger easterly winds tomorrow across the Beaufort Seacoast and across parts of the Chukchi Seacoast up to 25 knots or so. Blizzard conditions or blizzard warning there tonight for the Chukchi Seacoast. For Saturday, easterlies die off a little bit, 20 to 25 knot winds, but pick up across Kotzebue Sound, more of a southeasterly flow there at 30 knots for Saturday. So the southerly winds continue. Recapping tonight's weather, periods of rain and heavy rain possible across the Prince William Sound region, areas around Yakutat where a flood warning is still in effect. And pockets of rain will be heavy at times around Kodiak Island into south central. There may also be some winds across some of the higher terrain. The greatest threat for some high winds around the Alaska Range with gusts between 45 and 60 miles per hour around the passes there. Also looking for blizzard conditions around the Pribilofs and the Chukchi Seacoast. Look for areas of light freezing rain, winter weather advisories for a large part of the interior from west to east there. Also some accumulating snow will be possible, especially for north and western parts of the interior and into the Brooks Range. Rain continues into Friday for south central, but begins to dry for southeast. Saturday, you're looking at fog rather than wet weather in southeast, and more rain for south central. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.